This episode is sponsored by Grow Therapy. Grow Therapy was founded on the belief that quality mental health care should be accessible. It makes finding an in-network therapist easy. Go to growtherapy.com to find your match and let insurance pay for your therapy.
Welcome to a place where you'll leave feeling whole. The Counseling Podcast brings at-home counseling right to you, focusing on self-care, self-expression, and breaking down barriers. Dr. Jaclyn and Dr. Stokes bring over 20 years of combined experience and a new sense of style to the word counseling. The two use humor and lighthearted conversation to explore these deeper feelings. Let's take the stigma away from counseling together.
Hello and welcome to the Counseling Podcast. I'm Dr. Jaclyn.
And I'm Dr. Stokes.
And today we have a special guest, Dr. Marni Feuerman, and she is going to share her expertise on couples and emotionally focused therapy. So thank you for being here, Dr. Marni.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thanks. Why don't you go ahead and share more about yourself with our listeners and let them know how they can find you?
Sure. So I am a licensed therapist in South Florida, and I specialize in couples therapy. I'm a certified emotionally focused couples therapist and supervisor. I'm also certified in a process called discernment counseling, which I'm sure you've heard of. So some couples come into us and they're on the brink of divorce or there's ambivalence. So I certainly work with that as well. And I also do a lot of trauma-informed therapy. And I would say I just love working with couples and also individuals. I kind of say dating to divorce. So people struggling with love or people struggling with their relationships, I would say that's my wheelhouse. And I also do a lot of writing. So I have articles out there. I do a lot of media contributions. And I also wrote a self-help book that came out a couple years ago for women struggling with unhealthy relationship patterns. And I would say, I just like to put out a lot of material, a lot of knowledge to hopefully help people who may be struggling with their relationships. So I look for lots of different ways to offer that help, whether it's in they're reading it online or they're coming to my office or they're hearing me on a podcast. So it's great that you both are doing something like this as well, because I think we need a lot of resources and we need people to have access to it. We know not everyone can access this or they don't have the money necessarily to go get therapy, but at least they've got a lot of free resources out there.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. We need your expertise. What issues are you seeing most in your practice right now?
Well, I would say given what's gone on with the pandemic, certainly there's been a surge of mental health symptoms and problems and people really struggling. And so for my practice in particular, what I tend to have noticed more is that with the shutdowns and with people quarantining together, I think if there were issues or problems in people's relationships, they could not sweep them under the rug anymore. So a lot of problems were really coming to a head. So I would say I got a lot of calls with people either, really wanting to focus in and work on the relationship, or they were thinking about divorce or something like that. So I would get a lot of calls from people who it seemed as if the relationship was really different issues and things were coming to a point where they couldn't ignore them anymore. And then the other thing is, I think with people being home all the time, and with the ease of telehealth and doing therapy, it was easy for people to now finally get the therapy because they would both be together. They were home all day. They were able to carve out the time for some marriage counseling or couples therapy. So I would say just people realizing that, maybe a lot of the things that they were able to avoid because they were really busy during the day or traveling or going to work with kids or going out, they really couldn't ignore anymore. So it's sort of like everything's really pared down. We have two people dealing with each other really directly, and they couldn't ignore issues or problems. And so I was seeing a lot of that since COVID.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's one of those things about COVID, right? It's exposed, I think, a lot of things for people. And it sounds like you've really seen couples come into you where they're in this raw, vulnerable place. And tell us a little bit about this approach that you use, emotion-focused therapy. This is very important for our listeners. Why don't you break it down for everyone so we know what this is?
Sure. I'll try to keep something that can be kind of complicated, simple. I would say complicated to learn, but great for couples looking to really figure out what's going on in their relationship, especially if they're trying to get out of distress or they're finding that they're having the same sorts of arguments over and over. So emotionally focused therapy is based on attachment theory. It's all, which is sort of how those patterns develop from our early experiences, how the different bonds that we've had have been formed with caregivers. What we expect from people. Do we trust people? Can we rely and count on people? I know I'm really simplifying attachment theory, but those are the basics of it. It's also based on what we call in therapy systems theory, because we know that we exist within an interaction with other people. We don't just act in isolation. So if I say or do something, it will affect my partner. My partner will react, say something in return, then I say something back. And then hence we have sort of this systemic going back and forth interaction. It also looks at these negative communication patterns that tend to be rather predictable. If we think about how we respond when we're coping to something or when we're in distress, we know some people amp up and get really loud, or they escalate. We know other people avoid, they withdraw, they shut down. And we also know that those two different types of coping strategies can, again, and when I think about a system, how those affect each other, how people can draw each other into negative patterns. And so with emotionally focused therapy, or what we usually just call EFT for short, in EFT, we look to go under the surface of that to help people communicate effectively and clearly, really understand their emotional experiences and their reactions, and how to send much clearer messages to their partners and how to get unstuck from the negative patterns. And we aim to really foster closeness and connection. So we're really securing the bond between two people. And for a lot of people, that also creates like a revision almost of their attachment history that may not have been so good. So if they didn't know how to turn to someone to get their needs met, you have sort of a do-over. You can kind of rewrite that script for it, and hopefully, people feel at ease sharing, being vulnerable, talking about their needs, seeking comfort and support from their partners. And so that's the ultimate end goal of the EFT process. And I would say it's a very organic way of working with people. It also has a basis in we call humanistic psychology, which is very non-pathologizing. We really want to honor people's worldview, their experiences, what they're bringing to us, and what their blocks are. So we wouldn't necessarily say somebody is resistant, for example, or this is a resistant, difficult client. What we try to do is just understand the person. So we would just slow down and say, how I'm hitting up against someone's defensiveness or a block here. Let's take a look at that. Let's see what happened. We want to unpack it in the session. And then the other component that I think is really nice is that it's an experiential form of therapy. And by that, I mean that we create an experience for a couple during a session. So instead of it being very cognitive, like we're teaching something where they have to remember it when they're out in the world and they're in the middle of a fight, we know that doesn't really work so well because their emotions do come up and it's very hard for them to keep that logical part of their brain online. So with EFT, I'm often having people talk to each other in the session, and I'm very focused about what I'm listening for, what I'm hearing, new pieces of information, certainly vulnerabilities, negative views of themselves that maybe they haven't shared with their partner, And I'm having them turn and share that frequently back and forth so that in real time, I'm helping them restructure the way they're communicating. And the thing I find about that that's really helpful too is that it's kind of like riding a bike. If I explain to you how to ride a bike, and it might make a lot of sense to you in your head, but then if you never rode a bike before and you went out to ride a bike, you'd fall off and you'd lose your balance. And you would have to keep trying to ride that bike before you would get the hang of it. And so that's the idea behind experiential forms of therapy, is that you're wanting people to know what it feels like in their bones to talk different and to say something differently and to respond differently. And so they're practicing it in a session so that then when they go home, it's more sticky. So it's more in their bones kind of learning, more in the muscle memory, and they don't have to really so much stay in their heads to try to access something that just is usually not available to them when they're in distress with their partner. So hopefully that made a lot of sense. I'm sure you have some questions about all that I just said there.
I want to say that was a beautiful explanation of that model. And, as a therapist, who's pulled from a lot of these different models that you mentioned through the years, it's wonderful how this model of therapy has integrated all of these different models and theories. And I can see why it's so helpful, because I have so many colleagues who are EFT couples therapists, and they just rant and rave about this model, and I see why. I think for our listeners, it would be good if you could provide a hypothetical case study of a couple who maybe reached out to you with a common issue that you see, and maybe you could walk through like an approach that you might take with them by way of using EFT.
Well, I'm sure you've heard this before. So a lot of people will come in and they'll say we have communication issues, right? They'll give you something very, very vague, which I totally get why that's what they would say, because they're thinking like, okay, I think I'm speaking clearly. I think I understand, things. Why won't my partner, or why does he see it differently? And so people will come in with that, and then what I start to do is I want to get a sense of what it's like for each of them to kind of walk in their shoes in that relationship. So as I'm kind of hearing them talk, I'm just listening for what each person's perceptions are like. I know they're going to be different, so I'm not there to try to figure out who's right, who's wrong, whose view is more valid. They both have validity. And so I would say, probably the more clinically artistic side of things is making sure you're validating each partner without invalidating the other one, which is sometimes tricky to do. But I just want to honor both of their perceptions and how they see themselves and how they see the relationship and how they see their partners. And then I usually want to ask something about, tell me where you're getting stuck. What does it look like when you get stuck? So then I'm trying to have them take me into this distress point. What's a typical fight? The last fight you had, can you kind of just paint the picture for me? Or if I was a fly on the wall? And I'm listening for what sets it off. So I might hear what we call the cue or the trigger. And usually it could be almost anything. We know that there's certainly top subjects people fight about, sex, money, parenting. We know that there's those hot topics. But sometimes it could be something really minor. And so that's my launching point. And then I kind of want to know what happened. So when he came home late from whatever, out watching the football game, okay, and you said, hey, how come you're home so late? And he got upset and agitated and yelled, and you yelled back. Can we kind of slow down? I kind of want to hear that in slow motion. And so I'm hearing sort of the, maybe the very superficial sort of information here of what happened, but then I want to break it down and I want to know, all right, when he came home late from the game, what'd you say to yourself? Like, what came up in your mind? Then I'm kind of listening for something that may be a little more attachment laden sort of perspectives. Let's say it's a wife. She says to me, well, I told him how much it upsets me every time he comes home late, and I just feel like he just doesn't care about me. I'm just not a priority. Kind of like ding, 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 ding. Okay, so now I'm getting a little more beneath the surface, where I have somebody who suddenly goes from, it's not the content issue anymore. It's not just about coming home late. It's not just about maybe her wanting to ruin his fun, but suddenly she's feeling like she's not a priority in the relationship. So now I'm sort of in a relational zone type place. And so I said, what do you do? And she says, well, that's when I screamed at him. That's when I yelled at him. Oh, you yelled at him. And then what did he do? Well, when I yelled at him, then he just walked out of the room, and that made me even louder. Then I screamed even louder, and I followed him through the house. And he says to me, I said, well, what was going on through your mind? Well, she gets so angry. She's so irrational. I can't even deal with her. So I just try to calm her down. I figure I better leave because it's going to get worse. If I stay there and fight with her, it's going to get worse. So now I'm hearing a little bit of his coping strategy, right? He's not really trying to piss her off more, but he kind of is pissing her off more because the best way he knows how to cope is to maybe shut down and pull away, not say anything. Oh, so what happens there? Tell me more about that. So you go away and you're hoping to calm her down. And what's coming up in your head? What are you thinking? Well, I feel it seems as if no matter what I do, I just can't get it right with her. Yesterday I did all kinds of things. I helped her around the house. I even vacuumed. All the dishes were done. All I wanted to do was go hang out with my friends. I come home a little late and she just explodes. And it's just like, I can't ever seem to win with her. Okay, so now I'm kind of hearing his little piece here of how he feels about himself, that in his wife's eyes, he's always disappointing her. He can never get it right. And then I kind of start reflecting that piece, all of those pieces that I'm getting. I'm kind of fitting them together like the puzzle of their system. And I'm linking it, and then I kind of can zoom out and kind of say, okay, so let's kind of go to the beginning. It seems as if things were going okay. He goes out, stays out too late, comes home, and boom, you guys are in this argument. All of a sudden, things are kind of aren't going so well. And as soon as he walks in the door, you start thinking once again that you're not important. And when you think you're not important, you start yelling. When you yell, I know that you then right away run for cover. You go hide. You're just trying to calm this thing down. But inside you're telling me it seems as if you can never get it right with her. And then I check in with them a lot. Hey, is that right? Do I have all that right? Does that sound, like the way it goes with you? Usually people say like, yes, that's what happens. And so I'm just starting to piece together the negative pattern between them. So I stay away from, is lateness a problem? Is, her screaming a problem? It's his fault. It's her fault. Like I'm not really going to that. My ultimate goal is to help them see their reactions and speak a little differently from a much less defended or reactive place so that they can have this conversation and that it doesn't come between them and that they can maybe stay connected during that conversation. So he can kind of know how to stay in the room. She can know how to maybe calm it down a bit, and that they can talk. That's ultimately my goal. So no matter what topic comes up, if I stay in that topic content area, then I'm not really teaching them the how of their conversation and their communication. And so I need them to eventually fire me, right? I need them to leave so they can go and do this on their own. They don't need help anymore. And so that's why I really want to look at the mechanics or kind of what's what's running things, as opposed to staying in those content areas. So that's also, I guess, sort of how it would look if we kind of did this mini case study. Hopefully that gave you a picture.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it's, hopefully they're taking these new and healthy relationship patterns and implementing them in the house, because like you said, when they come to you, they might feel really disconnected. And so we need to help create that emotional bond again to feel them secure within their relationship. And you said conversation. What are the conversations couples should be having, or what are, maybe topics maybe they should focus on that maybe they're scared to talk to their partner about, of this is how I'm feeling, but I'm nervous to share that with my partner, and how can they kind of go to their partner and feel comfortable doing that?
Sure. I think if people get very reflective about what are the feelings that might be fueling some of their reactivity, and to if they can stay more in that place, we usually refer to that as primary emotion or the more vulnerable emotions. For example, take anger, which is not 100% of the time, but a lot of times it's seen as a very reactive emotion. But let's say something else is fueling that. Let's say underneath, sort of under the that's just the tip of the iceberg, but underneath is like fear, or maybe hurt or sadness, or something else. That if people can be reflective about what might be underneath, that maybe that emotion isn't the only one there. There could be some anger too, but maybe there's more, and maybe there's a way to express it that will pull your partner closer to you. So if people express those, let's say, softer, they express it in a less intense way. So if you're approaching someone and let's say you're screaming at them in anger because you're so upset, and then you have some time to sort of crank that down a bit, and you return to them and you say in a much more softer way, I was really upset, when you came home late, and I don't know why, but I get really insecure about that. Sometimes I feel like I'm just not on your mind, and I just feel like I have to let you know. That person's usually not going to march out of the room, run away from you. So I think if we can talk more softly, more vulnerably, from what is like what our fears are, kind of what we call our attachment fears. What's the worst thing you imagine? If that thought you're having is true, what's the worst thing that comes up for you? Can you go and talk to your partner about that? And if you find that it's really hard to, maybe just start with the conversation around that. You can go to your partner and say, I feel like we're not, we kind of get stuck around really talking to each other around the more vulnerable stuff, our fears and our worries, and what makes us feel really loved with each other. Or maybe some of the things that we used to struggle with when we were much younger. The things that we all do. Are we worthy? Are we lovable? Do some of those things come up for you? And are you sharing those things? Are you sharing the stuff that's deeper in your heart? Because that's what builds the closeness and the connection. It's those feelings. That's when people, I think, feel most connected to each other, when they're sharing on that level.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like you mentioned, people may make the call to come into couples therapy because they say they have communication issues, and maybe they do, but then you get them in the space and you use this approach and you figure out how they attach to each other and how they learned how to attach to people. And you explore some of those core underlying emotions that are maybe driving some of these behaviors and some of these patterns. And with this model of therapy, you're able to hold space and say, hey, this is actually what it's really about. And so it's almost like you help to create this experience so they can understand each other on a deeper level, and then maybe go back home and work on the communication stuff, but really they're working on those deeper issues as well. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. Mm-hmm.
What types of tips would you give couples, or do you give to kind of practice in their home, of different activities, or for them to do it together, or different positive new habits for them to focus on?
Yeah, and I know every therapist feels a little differently about this one. I get a little, I guess, scared about giving homework to people if I don't think they're ready, because I just don't want to set them up for failure sometimes. So what I do tend to tell them to do is to like read. Sometimes if they want to read a book, or do it on audio, or I will send them some podcasts, and I just put it to them as very casually, like, hey, if you want, it'd be great for you guys to listen to this, or if you go on a long car ride, put this on just to listen to, and then maybe pause it once in a while, talk about it, if something resonated for you, if you heard something. So usually it would be something that would, be sort of in the same wheelhouse of some of the stuff like we're talking about, whether it's EFT or a book by Dr. Sue Johnson, or even a book by Gottman's, or just some of these relational books where people can listen and chat about it and talk about it. If I have a couple that seems really gung-ho about homework, and they like it and they're asking me for it, sometimes I'll give them some worksheets or a workbook to work on in between. But again, I never want them to feel like if they didn't do it, that they're like in trouble or something. And I don't want like the partners to also then fight over it, because sometimes you'll have one who will be like, I asked her to do the homework 10 times this week and she never found the time to do it. And then that's the fight they're coming in with. And I just end up feeling bad about that. So I try to give it in a very like a laid back way. But if people are willing to read some of these great books that are out there, or some of the content online, or listen to these podcasts and things, that's usually the homework that I give. So it's a little bit easier to accomplish for them.
And I would imagine too that, Dr. Marni, some of the homework is also the stuff that they learn in those experiential pieces in therapy. It's like, okay, no, what are you feeling here? It sounds like, you're feeling sad about this, versus, you're appearing angry, but underneath that, I'm hearing sadness. How do they apply some of those experiential techniques that you do in session with them at home?
Usually it happens a bit in a very organic way. And I will listen. So each week or 2 weeks or whenever they're coming in, I check in with them about their communication, about their talking, and if they got into a fight over something, or if things got a little distressed, but they were able to get out of it. What I'm listening for is what's called de-escalation of that pattern. So I'm hearing from them little pieces that they're telling me. And so sometimes they'll tell me like how it might look in that like imaginary couple we just talked about. Let's say the same thing happens. Okay, so husband goes out, stays out too late, comes home, wife is angry and upset. But instead of yelling, this time she goes to him and she says, you just came home late again. And, this is the thing that, remember, like we talked about this. This is when I start feeling like I'm not a priority and it makes me sad. I don't want to get angry at you because I know you leave. I know you walk out. So I really need you to stay and talk to me. And I need you to hear how I'm feeling. And so she did like a little piece different to make it safer for him to stay. And they may not have the most perfect conversation, maybe a little clunky, it may still escalate a little bit, but at least I heard there's a little bit of a shift. And so I'm listening for those sorts of things. And if people, where I might give one or the other, maybe a little more homework, is if they tell me a lot, if I hear a lot that they're saying to me, I don't really know how I feel, or I don't know. They're saying, I don't know a lot. They're not really as connected to their body and the physical sensations and sort of what makes up emotion. They're maybe a little more cognitive, or they're just telling me something like I was frustrated, and then all I get is frustrated throughout the session. I'm not able to get a whole lot deeper. So for those people, I might have them do some homework around mindfulness meditation, or do a little journaling, or do something that they can just become much more in touch with their own inner experiences and their own inner feelings, because everybody has a different repertoire of how well they do with emotional expression, naming emotions, feeling and sensing their own emotions. We know that that can vary widely. Men tend to struggle a little bit more with that, and certain men do. And I think that just speaks to how we've raised men and women differently, and some of the gender differences around that. So once in a while, I might just have somebody who I'm just wanting them to do a little homework where they can just get more in touch with their own emotional worlds. So something like that is also, I find, is also really helpful too, because it translates when they're trying to communicate and they're like, oh, you know what? I don't just feel frustrated. I actually feel, I actually notice I'm a little bit, sad too, and those other emotions are coming online for the person to now much more clearly and directly communicate with their partner.
That's wonderful. Very insightful. So let's say a couple goes through, several months of EFT and they've recovered and they're on the other end. What does a healthy, fully functional relationship look like once they've ran the course of treatment?
Well, two people feel, I think, that there's a tremendous amount of safety to bring them these, their emotional worlds, their fears, their longings, their needs. They're able to do it much more directly. So I think they would feel really safe and secure and trusting doing that. I think they would feel like they're much more consistent with each other around making sure that they're talking a lot, and that they're not letting things just go and pile up and have resentments, and they're actually bringing up things with each other. There is more emotional engagement, so they would report maybe that, yeah, we do feel much more connected, and there's certainly a lot of trust. Like, they feel on a deeper level that they really can trust their partner. So I would say, those are some of the things, some of the characteristics that I would want to hear from people if I felt like they were in a good place and they can march off into the sunset together on their way.
That's great. Do you have any other tips or anything that you feel like is important for our listeners to know about this method?
I think if people are feeling that their relationship's in distress, or they just want to feel more closer and connected, maybe they're doing okay, but they think, hey, we can kind of do better. Or they feel like things have just gotten a little stale, there's a lot of well-trained EFT therapists, luckily, all over the world now. So I would say don't hesitate, to reach out for some therapy, especially if it, EFT. I think people, like I said, really take to it. They really seem to like it. And also, EFT has been expanded to help individuals and couples. So I think it's also great for people struggling with love, or they feel like they keep picking the wrong kind of partner, or they don't know what's going on or what's wrong or why they can't find love, or they've got some history with their family that they think is still affecting them, and they're wanting to understand their family system that they came from a little better, maybe not repeat mistakes in future relationships. So it's great for that. And then it's also good for families. I mean, and this could be a family with young children. This could be adult kids. I don't work so much with young children, but I do have some families where they're like young adults or adult children that are already out of the house, but there is some conflict or rifts or estrangements or things like that. So I work with that as well. So I think if people think about EFT, I think they have to just think of it as a really great way to have healthy, secure, functional relationships. So I would say it's a good method, just if that's what they're trying to achieve in their life. And I know most of us do want that.
Perfect. And I think it's a good time now for our listeners, if they have any questions, for you to provide any resources or your websites where they can find you. And I know you write a lot of content and where they can see all that. So if they have questions there, we can put that on the podcast and let them have that.
Great. So yes, I have my South Florida psychotherapy practice website, which is thetalkingsolution.com. So that's all one word, thetalkingsolution.com. And then I also have a website that highlights my book and some online resources and digital downloads and things like that. And it's called drmarnionline.com, drmarnionline.com. That's where to find me.
Perfect. We can seriously sit here all day, and you're so well versed and you have so much to contribute. We would love to have you back and talk about other areas in your book, and just, I know you have so much to share. So we thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to anytime. It was great talking to you both.
Thank you so much.
We want to thank all of you for taking the time to listen and being present with us today. Until next time, have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much for joining us here today on the Counseling Podcast with Dr. Jaclyn and Dr. Stokes. Please take this time to thank yourself for putting in the work. If this episode impacted you in any way, let us know with a loving and honest review. If you have any questions or want to continue the conversation from today, you can reach out to us at thecounselingpodcast@gmail.com, and we can answer your questions right here on the show. Or you can find Dr. Jaclyn and Dr. Stokes on Instagram at DocJaclyn and at Dr.Jeremiah.Stokes.